Hello, this is Vivian Young with 1000 Friends of Florida, and I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar, Planning for Sea Level Rise, Broward County Responds. We'd like to go over some housekeeping and details before we actually start with our presentation. Just a little bit about 1000 Friends of Florida. We were founded in 1986 as a nonprofit membership organization, and we focus on strategies to save special places and build better communities. If you want to find out more about us, we encourage you to sign up for our email alerts, which is 1000friendsoflorida.org/alerts, and you'll get information on webinars and other information. We'd like to thank the sponsors of this webinar. The major sponsors include the Archibald Foundation and Mosaic. Our President Club sponsors are Cobb and Cole, the Perkins Charitable Foundation, and the William Howard Flowers Jr. Foundation. And our sponsors are the American Planning Association Florida Chapter, Ronald Book PA, Dover Cole and Partners, Kitson Evergreen LLC, and Thompson Brock Luger and Company. We do have a full slate of webinars coming up. You can go to our website, and I'll show you that link in a minute, and sign up for our November webinar, which is Planning for Complete Streets in Florida. The registration is going to come online shortly for our December webinar on Planning for Greenways. We have a number set up for 2015, and we'll be starting to post those pretty soon as well. So we hope you'll be able to participate in upcoming events. For those of you who haven't done it, we've extended our survey. We do have a 10-question anonymous survey to try to find out what communities around Florida are doing to address sea level rise. So if you haven't already done it, you can again go to our website, which I'll show you the link in a minute, and access it there, or go to surveymonkey.com /s/Florida Sea Level, and we'd really appreciate it. We're trying to build our sources of information on what is happening in Florida, and a lot is happening, so any updates you can provide are greatly appreciated. This is our website. Our link is 1000friendsoflorida.org, and I wanted to point out a few things. If you want to download the PowerPoint, it is loaded under What's New. You click on this link and you can access it there. The survey on climate change and sea level rise you can access here. If you want to find out about upcoming webinars, you can click on Outreach, and there is an icon for upcoming webinars. We also encourage you to donate and support us, as we are a nonprofit and appreciate your support. This webinar has been approved for 2 AICPCM for planners, 2 contact hours for certified environmental health professionals, 1 CEC for certified floodplain managers, and CLE for Florida attorneys. And if you go to the page with our webinars, you'll see a link at the top that has information on all the credits that we've received if you don't write it down fast enough now. Again, a little bit more housekeeping. You have a control box right here that looks something like this. This is mine. Yours might look a little different. There is a chat box right here. If it isn't expanded, you just click on the little plus sign right here and it will expand it. You can type in any questions that you might have here. And at the end of the webinar, we have about 30 minutes allocated for questions and answers, and I will try to ask as many of your questions as possible of the various presenters. I am going to, in just a minute here, transfer it over to Charles. And Charles, if you wanted to introduce our presenters.
Okay, thanks, Vivian. This is Charles Pattison. I'm the Policy Director at 1000 Friends of Florida. I'm going to introduce our panelists in the order that they'll be speaking, and just a reminder, this is our second webinar on sea level rise. We have a third one dealing with legal issues that's coming up next year, January 14th. So thank you for attending. I think you'll find this extremely helpful. Dr. Jennifer Gerardo is the Director of the Broward County's Natural Resources Planning and Management Division. Since joining the county in 2002, she has overseen the development of the countywide integrated water resources plan, the convening of regional water and climate change task forces, and advancement of multi-jurisdictional initiatives, focused on water conservation, alternative water supply planning, and planning for sea level rise. In 2013, she was recognized by the White House as a champion of change for her leadership in climate resilience, and currently serves as the lead staff for the Presidential Task Force on Climate Resilience and Preparedness Built Systems Work Group. She's an original member of the Staff Steering Committee to the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact, chaired the Compact's Built Environment Work Group, and co-authored the Regional Climate Action Plan. Dr. Gerardo earned her PhD in Marine Biology and Fisheries from the University of Miami. Next is James Cromar, the Director of Planning for the Broward County Metropolitan Planning Organization. He has over 20 years of professional experience with a focus on the integration of transportation and land use planning. Previously, he had 12 years as a Denver-based consultant, followed by over 10 years of planning at the municipal and county level in South Florida. He's responsible for planning activities of the Broward MPO with an emphasis on increasing transportation options in the communities and leveraging public investment to improve quality of life and address the environment. Next is Julie Dennis. She has worked in private, local, state, and federal government sectors of planning and currently works as the Community Program Manager with the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity Division of Community Development, where she's focusing on asset-based community economic development through the Competitive Florida Initiative. In addition, she provides technical assistance on working waterfronts preservation, post-disaster redevelopment planning, and sea level rise adaptation. She's published articles and reports and presented to local, state, and national audiences on subjects such as long-term recovery, asset-based economic development, coastal community planning, adaptation planning, and hazard mitigation. She received her master's degree in urban and regional planning from Florida State University. Next is Susan Torriente. She is the Assistant City Manager in Fort Lauderdale. She oversees sustainable development, transportation and mobility, public work, parks and recreation, and structural innovation. Recently, she was the Sustainability Director at Miami-Dade County. She established Broward's first sustainability and climate action plan called Greenprint. She's been a member of the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Compact Steering Committee since its inception in 2009. She was selected for the 2012 International City Managers Association Sustainable Communities Fellowship and ICMA City Links Cooperative Agreement with Durban, South Africa. She's a member of the State of Florida Department of Economic Opportunities Community Resiliency Focus Group and ICLEI's Resilient Communities for America Advisory Committee. She has a bachelor's degree in English and a master's in public administration from the University of Miami. And last, Jim Keth began his career at the City of Fort Lauderdale in 1994, served in various roles within the Planning and Zoning Department, the Building Department, and the Public Services Department. He has served as the Development Review Committee Chair, Acting Comprehensive Sustainability Coordination Manager, and Principal Planner. In 2012, as Principal Environmental Strategist, he joined the City of Fort Lauderdale's newly created Public Works Department Sustainability Division. He's primarily tasked with advancing adaptation and resiliency climate initiatives, incorporating them into city documents, and implementing both hard and soft infrastructure tools and techniques. He has authored a chapter entitled "We Are Ready, We Are a Resilient and Safe Coastal Community, Fast Forward Fort Lauderdale, Our City, Our Vision 2035. He earned a Bachelor's of Science with a Certificate in Planning Studies from Florida State and a Environmental Specialization Master's degree from Florida Atlantic University. He's also a United States Green Building Council Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design accredited professional. So I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, and we'll begin the webinar.
Good afternoon. Are you able to hear me all right?
Yes.
I'll trust, yes. Okay, thank you. Well, it's my pleasure to be able to lend support to today's webinar, and I was asked specifically to provide a bit of introduction to some of the planning efforts that are taking place within Broward County and regionally on climate change with an emphasis on sea level rise. And I'll be providing a little bit of introduction to some of the vulnerabilities of our region before moving into some of the specifics of the planning activities. For those who are not familiar with Broward County, we are located in southeast Florida. You see the general statistics here. We have quite an extensive, something just happened with my screen. I'm trusting it's working all right.
Jennifer, this is Vivian. You've gotten out of the slideshow mode. Yeah, this is Vivian. You need to click on slideshow at the top where it says file and home. There's a slideshow. Click on that.
Sorry, I don't have a mouse. Let's see.
There. Okay, and then
okay.
from current slide. There you go. That'll get you back. There you go.
Okay, apologize. Don't know what happened. In any event, so thinking about Broward County, some of the reasons that we're particularly concerned about climate change and sea level rise are related to our very dense urban population. The fact that we've got extensive coastline, like most of southeast Florida, we're flat, low-lying, vulnerable to sea level rise and storm surge. And of course, one of the complicating factors in our region is the very porous geology. That means that we not only have to worry about encroaching water along the shoreline, but ultimately what it does to our groundwater table and our entire water management system because of the influence on groundwater elevations and all of our drainage and storm infrastructure. And because we are a community with 31 cities, it really does require extensive coordination and intergovernmental collaboration on these initiatives, and I think we have a pretty strong history of working successfully in that arena. And one of the concerns that we also have as a community is the continued preservation and protection of our natural resources. Broward County has really celebrated a long-standing history of very, very strict environmental protections, and we know that with climate change, there's the potential for adaptation strategies that maybe aren't as sensitive to the natural system's needs as we want to ensure. And so this has been a very prominent part of our planning efforts, and I'll be able to touch on that briefly today. And I'll also acknowledge that all of these activities, the consideration of climate change and resource conservation, are all having to be considered within an environment in which we continue to see very significant investments in development, redevelopment, urban infrastructure, and continued plans for accommodating growth. While I've captured here reference to the Port of Miami, because regionally we're seeing these types of investments. Just in Broward County alone, we're looking at about $3 billion in infrastructure projects that are currently underway and nearing completion. So it's just another layer in which all of our planning efforts need to be contemplated. And then in thinking about how climate change and these influences will begin to impact our community, they're fairly well recognized, I think, consistent with what many of the pressures are that we've observed over the last several decades, and pressures that are clearly highlighted in the most recent National Climate Assessment. But they include those of increasing sea level rise. We'll talk more about the specifics of that. Rising temperatures. South Florida in general is expected to see some of the most significant increases in temperature and heat waves and max day temperatures on total. Extreme rainfall conditions, we're seeing evidence of that now with increasing number of 1 in 100-year storms that are happening in very close proximity to one another, both geographically and spatially, temporally, as well as extreme drought that can affect our water supplies, also making our aquifer more vulnerable to saltwater intrusion as we see groundwater elevations drop during drought. And all of these have implications for flooding, not just coastal but inland, and I'll provide more insight as to why that is a circumstance here in our community. more intense storm intensity that affects beach erosion and includes damage to built infrastructure, and then ocean acidification. I won't have a chance to talk too much about that specifically, but clearly our efforts are also focused on reducing the anthropogenic impacts or influences that can degrade the natural environment that make it harder for our natural systems to adapt to a changing physical environment. And all of these considerations are really compounded when we think about the region as a whole, because we do share so much in the way of similarities, whether we're talking about interconnected natural systems, shared watersheds, shared airsheds, the fact that we share transportation systems where our populations are commuting throughout the region on a daily basis. So we're very interconnected, and when we think about the totality of Southeast Florida, this really is an area of great consequence, accounting for 1/3 of our entire state's gross domestic product, very significant in the way of commercial activity, trade, and a portal for a lot of economic exchange that is ultimately hinged on the viability of South Florida long-term as a sustainable region. And of course, we're looking through the 4-county area, about 110 cities representing nearly 6 million residents. And so what happens in South Florida will ultimately have a great impact on the rest of our state and coastal communities nationwide on our nation. And it was really this realization and the fact that so many of our Southeast Florida communities were investing significant resources in order to think strategically about climate change implications and what the necessary responses, that brought our elected leadership from the counties of Palm Beach, Broward, Miami-Dade, and Monroe to ultimately agree that a regional conversation needed to be our next step and our long-term strategy. And in 2009, we came together as a community to have this very conversation, to look at the impacts on our region, to discuss our shared initiatives, to think about opportunities for collaboration. It was well attended by elected leadership and by our agency staff and city and county managers, businesses, private entities, and academic, environmental, so forth. Very diverse the audience. And ultimately, well, in the course of the planning process, we began to think about a major deliverable from this event, and that ended up being the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact. And at that time, there was a formal commitment made by the 4 counties to organize our resources in a collaborative manner to become more effective in our developing a strategic approach and to work collectively in this process. And the voluntary commitment to the compact then included a number of primary elements. I think one of the more significant up front was that we would work collaboratively on energy and climate policies at both the state and federal level. We agreed to work in union to develop baseline tools that could help inform our planning processes, because prior to this we each had independent and not uniform sea level rise projections and methods for mapping vulnerability, a lot of inconsistencies for a region that was in very close proximity. So we agreed that as a region we needed to develop these unified tools to help inform our process, our planning process. The next step would then be to dedicate staff to support the development of a regional climate action plan, and then finally to reconnect on a regular basis annually with these climate summits that would allow us to assess our progress and make a determination about where we needed to go next, and really read the tea leaves in terms of where some of our priorities needed to be established. Having come through that process, there has been additional evolution. While we started with just the 4 county partners, I think it's really important to note that we soon appreciated that so much of the investments that are going to take place throughout our communities will be happening at the very local level. And so early on, or midway, we formally integrated into the staff steering committee a municipal representative from each one of the 4 counties. We also invited the strong leadership of the Nature Conservancy on environmental issues to ensure that those were not overlooked or diminished in any part of our process, and that were in fact enhanced. And we have formally had the support of the South Florida Water Management District, as well as the Regional Planning Council and the that came into the process later, and our Institute of Sustainable Communities that works at a national level has been a key facilitator of our effort, and I wanted to make that acknowledgement. And in addition, however, we've had a much broader network of resources that have come to the region and have allowed us to, I think, substantially advance in a very short time frame the progress of our region on climate change and very specific actions. And I think we all appreciate that had we not been working regionally and maybe well positioned ourselves for investment by these diverse agency partners and academic teams, that it would have been very hard to see the same level of expertise really be organized on a geographic area. But as it was, by working as a region, we really facilitated all of these other entities to participate in a process that really helped to better inform and make our tools and our recommendations all the more robust. After having organized our resources in such a manner, we then did begin to undertake the process of developing the unified tools. We conducted or developed a uniform greenhouse gas baseline to help inform our mitigation strategies. We also went through a process of developing a unified sea level rise projection, which is shown here, agreeing to a 9 to 24 inches by 2060. I'll share that we've just now reconvened our sea level rise work group in order to consider updating this projection based upon the more recent peer-reviewed literature, the IPCC and the National Climate Assessment. We also had the benefit of working with NOAA and the South Florida Water Management District to develop a regional digital elevation model to help provide a uniform strategy for mapping vulnerability under various sea level rise scenarios, as well as prioritizing the type of infrastructure that we would use to assign an economic implication and infrastructure detailing of vulnerabilities in the area. Some of those numbers are captured here, and I think have been well used in diverse reports and estimating that as a region we have, even outside of Miami-Dade, about $30 billion in infrastructure that is considered vulnerable under a 3-foot sea level rise scenario. And then following the completion of these unified tools, we then launched the process of working regionally to develop a regional climate action plan, and reached out to diverse stakeholder groups. We organized around specific topical areas, and then undertook a very, I think, a transparent process of gaining public review and input into the document itself. Ultimately, we were able to draft a report that was released in October 2012. We went through about a year of public process and refining the recommendations, and just this year the last of our 4 counties formally adopted the Regional Climate Action Plan produced by the Compact as a strategy for moving forward. It includes 110 recommendations across 7 planning areas, and we also develop a guideline or guidance for implementation, as well as a companion document. And the topical areas captured in the report are detailed here. The document is also available online for those who are interested. With a quick Google, it can be accessed. And I think that we are making very significant progress in a number of these areas regionally and both at the very local level in supporting implementation of the action plan. I just want to touch on some of those investments today. One of the things that I think is really impressive about our having worked regionally on this document was that very soon in this very early in this process, each of the 4 counties began thinking about how we could formally integrate climate into all aspects of our planning processes, recognizing first and foremost the value of the comprehensive plan is really establishing that necessary policy foundation and framework for our county operations and all agencies within the county, and many of the initiatives that we undertake that are regional in scope. All 4 of the counties today have formally approved or advanced these a climate element as part of their comprehensive plan, and I think that again was accelerated because of the regional approach. In Broward County, we also amended our land use plan to formally delineate areas of Broward County that are expected to be at increased risk of inundation with 2 feet of sea level rise. We call this our priority planning area map. We, in Broward County, integrated into our 10-year water supply facility work plan active implications of climate change for regional water supply planning and response strategies. We also partnered as a region to host a regional workshop to aid municipalities throughout the region in taking a similar approach. At the county level, our local mitigation strategy and our post-disaster development plan have both been amended to formally address climate change. And at the county, we too have integrated into our capital budget process a requirement to assess sea level rise and as well as energy efficiency and now renewable energy as part of all capital expenditures within county operations. We have also sought to bring these same sorts of planning tools to the municipalities in our region, again recognizing that so much of what will happen in the way of investment will happen at that level. We were successful in being able to partner with the Department of Economic Opportunity on a grant in which we worked to provide our coastal cities with diverse planning tools relating to the Regional Climate Action Plan and vulnerability assessments. We were also partnered with the Regional Planning Council in the City of Fort Lauderdale, and a recent grant focused on adaptation action areas, but of course that will be discussed in greater detail in this later in this webinar. One of the areas in which we've invested a great deal of resources, Broward County as well as our cities who've worked in partnership on this project, is with respect to advanced hydrologic modeling. And I expressed that because of our flat landscape and our porous geology, sea level rise is quite a challenge with implications for both water supply and saltwater intrusion into our potable water well fields, as well as drainage and flood control. In our region, we have about 1,800 miles of canals, this is in Broward, that are all interconnected and rely upon gravity operations in order to provide flood control and discharge to the coastal environment. So to the extent that sea level's rising and the discharge is reduced because there's backflow into the systems, those flooding implications extend all the way inland. So we have partnered with the United States Geological Survey on development of very robust models that are integrated surface and groundwater models that couple with variable density or sea level rise models, and then also downscaling of global climate conditions and a very high level or detailed representation of the transmissivity of the aquifer, both at depth and in the north, south, and west-east plains. So very much allowing us to get a handle on what types of design standards we may need to be reconsidering as we look at the implications of sea level rise on our land surface and these water management systems. We're just now finalizing the calibration of these models and are now working through a process of testing adaptation strategies for both drainage and flood control as well as water supply, and we do intend that the model output here will be used to develop new criteria for our surface water management systems, for our transportation systems, and also undertaking higher level modeling to look at redoing our vulnerability maps utilizing the FEMA flood criteria, but with sea level rise embedded. And I just want to provide a quick example of some of the outcome from these, or the lessons that are being derived from this modeling in the north part of the county, we were able to look historically at the movement of the saltwater front in the aquifer and kind of test how land development and water operations and sea level rise, all of those end up contributing to the movement of the front. And if we look at the 2005 scenario, we found that through this calibrated model, if only looking at the function of sea level rise, we would have expected the front to have moved about 820 feet in the calibration period, and a lot of this is due to historical drainage of the Everglades. And then if we were to look at only the function of, or the influence of well field operations and no sea level rise, we would have expected the front to move 1,600 feet. But instead what we found was a full movement of the front of about 5,000 feet, and it demonstrated to us that these influences are not additive, but they're accelerated. And sea level rise is increasingly going to serve as the primary forcing function on the on this landward migration. And so we can do predictive analyses, and these rates are somewhat conservative because this work was undertaken early in 2000, but we can also see the extent to which under sea level rise scenarios well fields end up being impacted. And we're moving now into the completion of similar work in the central and south parts of our county, and doing the predictive scenarios of with a 2-foot increase in sea level suggests most of the well fields in the South County will in fact be intruded by salt water, so this will necessitate relocation and the development of alternative water supplies in the planning horizon of 40 to 50 years. And we're seeing notable changes in groundwater elevations in the eastern communities that seem to be attributed to both sea level rise and very significant changes in water management operations that ultimately end up influencing drainage infrastructure as these eastern communities get squeezed by the more active flood management in the west, where drainage infrastructure is better developed, and sea level rise in the east. And it does really compound challenges, I think, for the entire these older communities in the east lacking the more current water management infrastructure to deal with not just current conditions but future. And I think I'll move through the slide. I want to talk regionally about water supply through the coordinated efforts of the compact. We have also come together, municipalities and several counties, to consider the development of a regional surface water reservoir that would help to capture these massive rainfall events that result in significant inundation, that would help reduce freshwater discharges that are harmful to our estuarine and coastal environments, as well as providing a mechanism for utilizing stormwater for reuse and recharge of our aquifer to manage saltwater intrusion, as well as well field offsets. And this is an effort that we've been working on since 2006. It's a project that none of us could ever afford individually, and it's the image here shows the sense of scale of what's being proposed. This is an existing reservoir adjacent to the site that we're hoping to move to construction on possibly in this next year. With regards to beach management, Broward County has also substantially rethought the way that we approach shoreline protection, but we do know that this will continue to be a major area of investment for a number of reasons, but coastal infrastructure and tourism are obviously two significant factors. But we are moving away from large-scale beach nourishment projects to more targeted truck haul projects. These will use a different source of sand that's higher quality, will have less of an environmental footprint, and as part of all of our projects, we're now integrating dunes. That is that I think is really forward progress for our region, because they weren't so widely embraced prior to Tropical Storm Sandy and some of the impacts that were realized in the city of Fort Lauderdale. we, through the organization of the compact and the leadership of the Nature Conservancy, we're also partnering as part of the Shoreline Resilience Work Group. And this effort has been focused on looking across the 4 counties to detail the types of living shoreline features that are already in place, and then thinking as a region about how we could begin to prioritize additional investments and green and infrastructure and living shoreline assets as part of shoreline and coastal resilience. And there have been a number of dune initiatives that, just because of this type of process, were advanced in this year, and it's just a small example, I think, of what the region is capable of. And the Nature Conservancy just produced, on behalf of all the partners, a real tremendous document that's highlighting this activity. And while we're not focusing so much on mitigation in this presentation, I didn't want to not make reference to the fact that there is a great deal of traction also being gained on energy efficiencies and renewable energy investments, much of which is reinforced through the Regional Climate Action Plan. And just for the sake of acknowledging Broward County's efforts, our county has adopted a 20% renewable energy goal. We're finalizing an action plan. We're trying to get PACE off the ground for all of Broward County. We've served as a lead on a multi-jurisdictional solar project that's designed to streamline the regulatory process to support solar installations. And we're also finalizing a community energy strategic plan supportive of both the counties and the regional action plans energy priorities. And because there is so much energy and resources organized around these efforts, we also are trying to ensure that they're not isolated at the regional scale, but the benefits of these investments are really being relayed in a way that can aid all of the communities in our South Florida jurisdiction. And with the support of the Institute of Sustainable Communities, we've been able to hold a number of regional convenings that are organized around priority recommendations within the Compact's Regional Climate Action Plan. And this is intended to be able to accelerate again, investments not just at the county level, but in partnership with all of the cities. And so some of the topical areas are captured here. And of course, you'll be hearing more about adaptation action areas in a moment. We also held a regional workshop in August focused on resilient redesign, kind of akin to the Dutch dialogues in Louisiana following Hurricane Katrina and the impacts of Tropical Storm Sandy up in the Northeast. This was about bringing in experts in landscape architecture, in engineering, in community development, in surface water management, diverse teams to focus on the South Florida environment and think about how we can begin to incorporate some of the features that we know to be so critical to the resiliency of our communities as part of development and redevelopment in advance of major disruptions, and really begin to integrate the planning and the infrastructure that's needed to support these transitions that might require a decade or more. And there seems to be traction on the outcome from this particular convening, and I think it's going to serve as some visioning for our region. Just to note, because I said up front with respect to the compact that policy coordination was a major element, and because it has served as the foundation for the advancement of the adaptation action area initiatives that are starting to populate the landscape. In the 2011 session, when we have continued to coordinate each year on joint legislative programs, but we also advocated with one voice for support of the Adaptation Action Area designation as part of the Growth Management Act in order to aid communities in prioritizing investments in infrastructure that support adaptation and the alignment of funding. And I think that has also been an area where we've seen accelerated activity, and many of the communities in our region today are actively considering how this policy and planning tool can help support the investments that need to take place here. And so in closing, I would just acknowledge that I think our collective assessment is that there has been a great deal of benefit gained by having worked and collaborated as part of this regional process. In addition to the great relationships that we have been able to enjoy with our neighboring partners, we have found that we've gained significant expanded access to resources, whether they're financial or technical, in our processes, because the planning and the expertise has been so robust. I think it has also added to the capacity of our region and it brought in I guess a technical foundation that while it was very solid here has really grown. We have accelerated the planning processes, as I think I've shared in a couple of examples, and I think the communication with one voice, whether we're talking to the community, our residents, the business community, or our legislators, that has also been an impactful sort of conversation that we've been able to generate. And I think at this point we just recognize the need to maintain this very strong forward momentum, feel like we have a great deal of advantage that's been gained to date, but so much more that needs to take place, and that's why these regional partnerships that are highlighted in the rest of the presentation end up being so very fundamental to carrying these types of actions forward. So with that, I'll go ahead and conclude and I think transition to Mr. Cromar.
Good afternoon. This is James Cromar, and I am from the Broward NPO, headquartered in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I wanted to speak a bit today about a more focused approach to some adaptation to the climate change. Jennifer talked very well about some of the vulnerability assessments that have already taken place, and so Broward NPO is heading up a project to deal with some adaptation. We're very familiar. There we go. Very familiar with some of the situations that face us here in South Florida, being built on a sensitive environment in a low-lying coastal area. On the right side, you see an image of Hurricane Wilma as it flew through. We had extreme weather situations. We also have our seasonal high tides. We're coming up on the king tide today, where the water table or the tide brings water typically into our low-lying areas along the coast in Las Olas area. And then we have regular occurrences where there may be weather events that cause flooding in certain low-lying areas. So as we think about the climate stressors that we need to address as part of our approach to adaptation, typically we're dealing with these major categories of sea level rise, storm surge issues, and then some flooding that might be associated with that, heavy precipitation, some extreme weather events that may occur, and even just intense storms that come unexpectedly, and then also some of the inland flooding that may be associated with that, with low or the high groundwater tables. The Broward NPO stepped in to lead a process then on behalf of our regional partners. Jennifer mentioned the South Florida Regional Climate Change Compact and the 4 counties that are involved there, and along with the NPOs and our transit providers and our regional planning councils and the Florida Department of Transportation, Broward NPO took the lead on applying for a grant from the Federal Highway Administrations to address vulnerability and adaptation. And our focus for the project was specifically on the regional transportation network in this 4-county area. So we will not be, or we're not looking at every single roadway within the network, but it's the major roadways and the major points of connectivity that connect different parts of our different counties, but also the counties amongst themselves. As you see in Monroe, it gets a bit tricky where US 1 is kind of the main corridor, so they have limited options for looking at other resources, but some of our other areas have more places that they can look around. So the goals of this process were not to start from scratch and to build on vulnerability assessments that had already taken place as part of the Southeast Florida Climate Change Compact. And the focus is to address the effects of extreme weather and climate events and sea level rise on specifically the regional transportation network. Then with this, we want to develop tools that we can look at how to incorporate adaptation goals into our decisions about funding and policy for transportation. And then we're also hoping that this process will serve as a model not only for others around the country, but also some of our smaller governments, even at a city level or at a county level. The overall approach has 4 main tasks, starting off in figuring out what is the regional transportation network, that's our inventory, and determining the extent of the exposure of these particular elements and roadways and railways on their exposure to the climate stressors. Then examining the adaptive capacity, how well they could respond to extreme events or being thrown offline, flooding, or potential needs for detours, how quickly they might be back on the system. Assessing the risk is the likelihood that these events might take place. Extreme weather, we have certain seasons, sea level rise, there's other predictive models for that. And then taking all this information to create policies and other approaches to decisions about investments. So the first task was to determine what are the regional assets on the network. And then exposing those to some of the different stressors. So you see on the table here some of the different tools that we use to build that. We didn't necessarily create new data, but worked with the data that was in place. I've had to do some bits of adjustment in terms of dealing with that material. I'm going to go through this very quickly. This gives you a sense of some of the data that we've used in part of creating this. There's basic mapping information and certain flooding threats, emergency management, environmental departments, different ways of looking at some of the potential effects on this system, and we can ask questions later about that. But 2 specific examples I wanted to show were one, in terms of the network itself, the red lines on this map indicate our MPO network of transportation facilities. And on a high level, a map that just shows a red line, general location is sufficient for some of our planning needs. But at the level of detail that we get to for this analysis, it's very important to know exactly where the roadway lies. So we had to switch to a NAVTech-based network as opposed to just the other network that we had that actually indicates where the facilities are. You can see sometimes a shift in a line will give you a totally different result of what may be going on in terms of potential impacts of these climate stressors. And then the second level, working with data, we noticed that there were gaps in terms of some of the details. So the black line here indicate a roadway that is on an embankment, and yet according to the FEMA maps, it looked like this area may be flooded. So our team had to go in and look at all these potential errors in the compilation of data and determine, okay, where are the embankments themselves? These roads aren't necessarily in drainage corridors right now. And then even where there are bridges, where are the approaches to the bridges, and how high are those, and how low is the substructure of the bridge? All these factors come into play as we're determining potential risks to the regional transportation network. This is an initial summary of what is going on with the analysis that we've done, showing first Palm Beach County and the potential impacts to the system there with flooding at a 100-year flood level based on the FEMA information. Again, a lot of areas don't necessarily have impacts from 100-year flood. We go down to Broward, we see a lot of impacts on the adjoining land uses, but again, not as many impacts on the roadway network. There are some areas of concern, some areas that we thought might be of concern, kind of southwestern Broward, that the roadway network seems to be in pretty good shape. It's the other adjoining land uses that might have some issues. Get down to Miami, we see that there are more issues with flooding on the regional network. A lot of areas that have great stressors placed on them. And again, as we get to the Key West, the Monroe County and the Keys, with US 1 being the primary roadway, and if that is impacted by flooding, that's a significant transportation impact to that area. In summary, then, you can see the northern parts of the region, Palm Beach and Broward, have 9–10% potential inundations on a 100-year storm. Miami-Dade about 20%, and then Monroe County 57%. That's a concern as we look at that network. The other factors that we'll be bringing into the equation then are sea level rise based on information from the compact, some storm surge information, potential inland flooding based on where there are high water tables and the porosity of geology and such. Then as we move into our next step, looking at the adaptive capacity, I mentioned that a bit, is how well the system might respond to certain impacts. If there are detours and potential loss of connectivity, what impact does that make on people's travel times, and then how quickly could the system be put back in place? Assuming inundation as opposed to damage to the roadways and networks, those will be different calculations. And then thirdly, assessing the risk. How likely is it that some of these impacts are going to take place? So bringing together these elements that we talked about before, exposure to the stressors, how sensitively they can respond, and how quickly they can get back on system. Again, this is a slide that has a lot of detail. In the interest of time, I'll pass it by and people can ask questions later. But finally, the big thing for us is then determining policies and approaches to dealing with this data. So we have 5 major categories that we're looking at, and I'll go through those briefly. As we're talking about our planning and prioritization, there are actions that our elected boards can take to make policy statements and then to identify prioritization that is tied to funding for improvement projects. So we talk about rehabilitating and reconstructing facilities. We want to look at, how to minimize the disruptions, apply design criteria in coastal and at-risk areas with flooding as givens in the design, addressing some of the drainage systems, and then looking at key infrastructure components in other areas where it may be appropriate to fortify the system. Looking at new facilities then, apply criteria that will effectively address some of the stressors that we've talked about, or even consider if those facilities can go in a different location. In terms of operations, plan ahead with detour routes, be able to identify if there's links in the system or weaknesses, how we may be able to address those on a short-term and longer-term basis as necessary, and then also being able to work with our emergency response providers to make that information available. And then finally, some smaller scale investments in terms of maintenance of hardening systems with traffic signals and wires and things of that sort, and also maintaining the drainage systems that we do have. So in closing, I just wanted to mention that we are approaching the end of this process. We will be coming to some recommendations in this next few months with the final report in January, at which time we hope that our partners on this process, the MPOs and the counties and some of the municipalities, might be able to adopt some of the recommendations that we're coming forward with. And finally, to set the stage for some of the discussion that will be coming from Fort Lauderdale, it was 2 years ago when the effects of seasonal high tide and the outer bands of Superstorm Sandy combined to wash out portions of A1A in Fort Lauderdale. It was a moment for us to realize the weakness in our processes of responding to emergencies of this kind. We had to take immediate emergency actions to provide funding, to get the roadway reopened, and then to fortify the system for future events. And so as we go forward, we're hoping that this process will help us make long-term investment strategies, but also be able to deal with emergencies as they should arise. And at this point, Ben, I will forward it over to Julie.
Okay, Julie, can you hear me? You are on the line now. Hello, Julie.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I think I muted myself with my headset.
Okay.
Lots of mute buttons. First, thank you so much for the opportunity to share a little bit today about the work we're doing at the Department of Economic Opportunity related to adaptation and community resiliency. Last month, a colleague of mine, Dan Fitzpatrick, who works here at DEO, presented on the 5-year effort that we're working on related to community resiliency and the work in that. And I'm going to go I'm going to give an overview a little of the adaptation action area work that we're doing that kind of correlates with some of that. I'm going to talk about the framework of the overall project, but really the cool, interesting stuff that's going on related to this project is really being done at the local level right now, and we're so fortunate to have our partners on the phone today to be able to talk about some of that work that's being done in the City of Fort Lauderdale. We're really proud to have the City of Fort Lauderdale, Broward County, and the South Florida Regional Planning Council as partners on this project, and very excited to be kind of almost probably about 3/4 of the way through this project now. So just to give you an overview of adaptation action areas, in 2011 significant changes were made to the growth management laws of Florida through the Community Planning Act. And so in addition to a number of changes, some language got added in statute that's been referred to as adaptation action areas. So I've got the language up here now, and just to kind of give you a summary, an adaptation action area is an optional comprehensive plan designation for areas that experience coastal flooding and that are vulnerable to the related impacts of rising sea levels for the purpose of prioritizing funding for infrastructure needs and adaptation plans. Local governments that adopt an adaptation action area may consider policies within their coastal management element of their local comprehensive plan to improve resilience to coastal flooding, and there's some criteria associated with them as well. So if we'll go to the next slide. You can see some of the criteria here that's listed. So areas below or at or near mean high or high water, and those that have a hydrological connection to coastal waters, and areas designated as evacuation zones for storm surge. So, you know, this is, you know, a couple of things to point out on this slide. One is in the very beginning it says at the option of the local government, and that's important. This is an optional comprehensive plan designation or policy tool, and you know, and then the connection to that coastal management element. I think that those are two big things to point out on this slide. And as this language was adopted into statute, we began to get a lot of questions. What the heck is an adaptation action area? A lot of people wanted to know, and you know, we turned to our partners in South Florida, who were very instrumental, as Jennifer said earlier, in getting this language passed, to really try to delve into that answer and to delve into that question and give some answers related to that. Next slide, please. So we'd received 5 years of funding to do community resiliency and integrate adaptation planning into the overall Florida planning framework, and we applied for some additional funding to really get at that question, what is an adaptation action area? So what we're doing now is first thing we did is we identified our partners, and we began to research policy options for adaptation action areas. So working with the South Florida RPC, we said, okay, what's everything under the sun that we could do with this designation of adaptation action area? And then we started our work with the City of Fort Lauderdale, and the City of Fort Lauderdale has been walking through the process of adopting adaptation action areas into their local comprehensive plan, which I'm sure you'll hear a little bit about in just a second. And you know, now we're really entering into this third phase, and that is where we're building guidance for statewide dissemination. So we're beginning to put together the tools based on the lessons learned from the City of Fort Lauderdale and from some of our other communities that are popping up and really beginning to look at this tool of adaptation action areas. So we're building guidance that really kind of keys in on those lessons learned and gives resources to communities. And this will be delivered in the form of a guidebook, as well as a form of a short video that'll kind of give you a short overview of adaptation action areas, and a case study that details the City of Fort Lauderdale's process, which has been extremely exciting to watch from our perspective and from my perspective. And then additionally, we'll be delivering some podcasts, and I think that these are going to be pretty interesting as well. What we've asked is that local communities, you know, that we interview local folks from the City of Fort Lauderdale, Broward County, and the region about adaptation action areas and why it's important to them. And what we're hoping to accomplish from this is kind of a peer-to-peer exchange to be able to say, you know, this really isn't about you know, us. This whole project is about us providing guidance, and the best way to get that guidance is from the communities that are doing them themselves. And these interviews provide that information on why they think it's important and why, from their perspective, working in their region, they chose to take action on it. and really all of our work related to the Community Resiliency Initiative and our adaptation action areas has been following the lead of our local governments who think this, who really believe this is a big issue for the the coming years, and is a big thing that we should be looking at from a planning perspective. And we're very fortunate to have all of those local governments and the members of our focus group in the mix to be able to provide that input as we go forward. Next slide, please. So I'm really going to conclude with this piece because I wanted to pass my time on to the City of Fort Lauderdale to give you the more interesting stuff. If you'd like more information about what we're doing, check out our website, floridajobs.org/adaptation planning, or feel free to reach out to me directly or to Dan Fitzpatrick, who was on the webinar last month. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. This is Susie Torriente. I'm an Assistant City Manager here in the City of Fort Lauderdale. And it's certainly a pleasure being here with you today. I think we're in the process of just setting up. And what Jimmy and I are going to do over the next few minutes is we're going to dig a little deeper, and we're going to bring you down to that municipal level. And Jimmy's going to continue talking about a lot of the technical stuff that you've been hearing from my friends and colleagues on the panel. But I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory and focus a little bit on some of the strategy and tell you the story of how some of this stuff actually started to come together. I'll talk a little bit about the grant, of course, and the timeline, but really focus on the integration. And Jimmy will focus on the outreach and the draft language and where we are so far and kind of the exciting next step that we're about to enter. And what I want to do is actually start there in 2011. I actually joined the county in 2011, and as you heard from Jennifer earlier in the conversation, I too had the pleasure of working on the compact since the very beginning. So I entered the city administration in 2011, but bringing with me 21 years of experience in Miami-Dade County. And bringing with me what I learned a little bit about the regional work and that new draft language about adaptation action areas. Really about a month into the job here, the relationships really started to make their connections, and I received a call from the Regional Planning Council asking me if I was interested in participating in this grant. Jimmy and I were working together on another project, and I knew his expertise in planning, and I thought, it seemed to make sense, and it was a perfect fit. And it seems perfect right now. At first, I didn't know what I was getting into, quite frankly, but I kind of took that leap of faith and said, I think this is something that we should do as a city. So in 2011, the new team is here, the new city manager is in place, and we start to reorganize the city. And as we reorganized the city, we streamlined the organization. We went from 16 departments down to 9, but we also took the opportunity to begin to weave in sustainability and climate adaptation into really the fabric of every single department. And again, I have the pleasure of working with those operational departments, so I can actually see firsthand how this integration is taking place. So as that first year kind of begins and ends, we enter 2012. Jennifer and I and others continue to work on the Regional Climate Action Plan, and we again finished that year in 2012 and adopted first by Broward in that fall. At the same time in the city, so I'm going to be kind of going back and forth between the region and the city just to kind of piece it all together, but as part of the further reorganization of the city, I went ahead and started creating a sustainability office, a small office housed in Public Works with 3 existing staffers, 2 excellent planners and a recycling coordinator. And again, that was the seed of building that team to what is today an entire division in Public Works. We started doing also in the city, we started doing these neighborhood resident satisfaction surveys. And again, because anybody who knows me knows that one of my mottos is connecting the dots. As we started doing these resident surveys, I started incorporating questions about sustainability and about climate resiliency. And so we started to really get a pulse on the community as to what they felt about climate, how they felt about sea level rise, and did they see the results of flooding over the years if they had been here a long time. And we started gathering kind of that pulse of the neighborhood, if you will. And that was one way to really listen to some feedback. Again, at the same time, we, Jimmy and I, and a couple of others of us, we started staffing a divisioning committee. And the divisioning committee was appointed by our city commission, really at the time of the 100-year anniversary of the city. And it really was meant to come together and look at the next 100 years, or maybe really a shorter period of time where we ended up now. It's the horizon is out to 2035. As we started staffing that committee and working with them, again, it was a natural fit to bring in all that work coming in from the region, to bring in those connections that were happening and that work that was happening in the region. As we went out into the community and as we staffed this committee, we talked to well over, I think we counted 1,500 different interactions with our residents, and we ended up having 5,000 or so different ideas that we gathered from the community. With that, we really started to create our community-wide vision plan, and that's called Fast Forward Fort Lauderdale. We started crafting that plan, and as we started analyzing and synthesizing the ideas that came from the community, we realized that a bulk of our residents were also talking about climate adaptation, and a bulk of our residents were also talking about resiliency, and they were talking about sea level rise. So again, that dialogue continued, that back and forth. If you jump to 2013, the vision plan was unanimously adopted by our city commission, and a few months later, our in-house city staff-driven plan, our strategic plan, Press Play, that was adopted by the city commission at the end of the year, and at the end of the fiscal year, let's say September. So we started from the very beginning, kind of integrating all this work, getting the staff in place, having that vision and strategic plan in place, and the work of the grant, and Jimmy will get into the details, that work continued, but the heavy outreach of that grant really began right after the visioning process and that very intense community vision process, community outreach process. So we were able to jump right off of that and almost continue the very focused conversation of climate adaptation. And what I'll do here is really just gloss over, but the outreach that happened in 2013 and the outreach in 2014 and the details of the plan, Jimmy's going to get into. But I really just think it's important to kind of show the snapshot of our evolution, if you will, and how we've been very strategic about making all these linkages and connecting all these, whether it's a small planning grant tied to our strategic plan, tied to that vision plan. And if you go to the next slide, we're tying it all even to our annual budget process, our annual capital investment process, and we're measuring it all in our departmental scorecards and in the metrics that are in our strategic plan Press Play. So I think that really is the most important aspect that, and what I want to mention is that we've been doing everything very strategically. We've been making these linkages, and as we were developing our Press Play, our strategic plan, this is just a snapshot from that. We took the opportunity to identify potential adaptation action areas and develop AAA policies. That's in our strategic plan, and we called out who were the leaders and who were the partners. Again, all by design and all with a lot of strategy, and now, I think 3 years later, Jimmy and I can kind of sit back and start to see how it's all starting to connect, and it's all starting to really, we're starting to see the fruits of our labor from the very beginning. I said earlier that it started as a small staff within Public Works with 3 people. Now it's actually an entire division, all the way from climate adaptation, but also to include our tree canopy and our city forester. It includes our waste and recycling program. It includes our entire fleet program because mitigation is part of the equation as well. So, you know, we've built that team, and now that team is really moving forward. And Jimmy's been part of it from the very beginning, and he really understands this, the planning work and this comp language work much better than I can. I work at another level, and he works at his, and we complement each other immensely, I think. So I'm going to let him kind of get into the details that I'm sure that a lot of folks are really curious about.
Thank you, Susie. Good afternoon, everyone. I guess I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our journey with regard to the Adaptation Action Areas Initiative, what we call our AAA. And as you can see on the slide, we had neighborhood outreach, and we had review and approval process that took place. And what we call our residents and our business owners, you'll hear me mention that we call them our neighbors. Now, as you can see, in October of 2013, we went to our Council of Civic Associations to present the initiative and our proposed strategy, and I'll speak to that a little later. We also, in January of this year, we had a climate adaptation open house and panel discussion. And in that meeting, we also introduced and asked for comment our policy comprehensive plan text language. In April, we went to our Sustainability Advisory Board as well as our Development Review Committee. And in May, we went to our Planning and Zoning Board, which is our local planning agency, for recommendation to our City Commission, and we received a unanimous approval on the Comprehensive Plan Text Amendment. And in June, just to bring you up to date, we went to our City Commission for our transmittal hearing to the state, and we also received a unanimous vote of approval for that. At the same time, we participated in the Hurricane Exposition, and we actually had a climate resiliency booth in which we could explain the AAAs a little bit further to our residents. Now, what you'll see is we had a little bit of a parallel track when we took this forward. And specifically, you could see in April, we went to our Technical Review Committee, which is primarily made up of staff, our DRC, within days of our Sustainability Advisory Board, which is an advisory board to our City Commission. Now, a lot of this, it's important to note that our idea and our strategy that we utilized was to do a little more educational and kind of setting the table, like Susie mentioned, even way back when we were working on our Vision Plan 2035. And sometimes taking a little bit of time on the front end, and it was kind of like a due diligence, we were able to kind of get to our residents and to our elected officials what AAAs might be and what some proposed strategies might be. And what's critical to all this is that we did a lot of listening. In fact, we probably did a lot less talking than we did listening, of course, and that started in the visioning process. And why we took a little bit more time at the front end is so that when we did actually move forward with the Comprehensive Plan Text Amendment, we were able to progress rapidly, smoothly, efficiently, for example, with parallel tracks whenever possible, and most importantly, continuously, without fits and starts. We wanted to keep that momentum going. And what we found, and we're nearing the end of the Comprehensive Plan Text Amendment portion of AAAs, we found that a little time with preparation at the front end has really paid great net dividends at the end. Now, one of the things we did very early on is we brought our AAA strategy to our City Commission at what we call City Commission conference meetings. And what those meetings are primarily, they are meetings in which the City Commission does not take formal action. However, they're very good for items for discussion purposes in order to acquire consensus on moving forward. And so we brought our proposed strategy on the Comprehensive Plan Text Amendment to the Commission on 2 occasions. to keep them up to date on that. Another kind of early on outreach that we kind of participated in was the Broward County Sustainability Stewards Workshop. And it's affiliated with the Broward American Planning Association in June of 2013. And what those meetings are, workshops are primarily made up of industry professionals as well as residents. And we got a lot of good feedback on our strategy at that meeting as well. Another very early on meeting that we attended was our Council of Civic Associations in October of 2013, and we presented our AAA initiative and some of our climate adaptation strategies and how they work together. And what our Council of Civic Associations is a group that represents we have 85 civic associations within the city of Fort Lauderdale. And at that meeting we received a unanimous approval to move forward with our strategy, and we got a lot of good input from them as well. Now at the same time, we were also at the conference meetings at City Commission and the Council of Civic Associations and also the Sustainability Stewards Workshop. We were also getting requests from individual neighborhood associations to come and meet with them to go over our initiative as well. Now throughout this process, the support of our regional partners, the South Florida Regional Planning Council and Broward County has been outstanding. Broward County's technical support continues to be just invaluable. They provide us with excellent scenario maps for the 1 foot and 2 foot sea level rise scenarios. And as you can see on the photo on the upper right hand portion of the slide, at our climate adaptation open house and panel discussion in January, many of our residents were really interested in the maps. Now, at this open house, the opening remarks were from our Mayor Seiler, who has been very supportive of this initiative in climate adaptation and is one of the leaders in the region on this topic. And also what was very unique to this climate adaptation open house was that it was the first meeting that was a non-public hearing. That is, it was not like a city commission meeting or anything like that. That was broadcasted live on our cable television channel as well as streamed live online. And also it was very interactive, and we incorporated social media, and we fielded, the panel fielded questions via Twitter and Facebook. Also, the panel was made up of city representatives as well as representatives from our partners, the South Florida Regional Planning Council and Broward County. And throughout this initiative and this process, we have been very supportive of one another, and we've always been communicating a very cohesive, consistent message. Now, with the comprehensive text amendment language, specifically what we did was we added a goal, an objective, and an evaluation measure, and 14 associated policies to our coastal management element. Now, this goal, objective, and the associated policies are all consistent with our other plans and specifically with our vision plan. And what we did is we wrote the language to be very clear, deliberate, and certain, yet with a reasonable amount of flexibility. And we did that for a number of reasons. First and foremost is that we know that climate change and sea level rise is very dynamic, and we need to have the opportunity to be dynamic and flexible in the future to meet these challenges. Now, what we did these are just some summaries of the policies, but we wanted to build upon the relationships and partnerships that we've had all along this whole journey. So it was very important to put in the policies that we would continue to foster effective collaborations, that we would align whenever possible with national, state, regional strategy documents. Also, as Susie mentioned, to continue the integration of AAAs into existing city processes and plans. And along the way, at all the review processes, they have gone very, very positively. And we did make a lot of adjustments along the way based on neighbor input. And just to conclude, our next steps, we're very excited. In less than 2 weeks, actually, on October 21st, our comprehensive plan text amendment, the formal amendment, will be going before our City Commission for final adoption approval. And we're hopeful that will go very well, as it has on this entire journey. Also, we are looking at some existing systems in place for the integration of AAAs, such as our stormwater plan update, as well as an initiative, our environmental and sustainability management system, ISO 14001 system, as well as many other systems that we're kind of contemplating to integrate this into. Also, very importantly, is the prioritization of funding, and so we're looking at some of the mechanisms for that to actually do the designations and to move it forward and to fund the adaptation actions associated with them. And with that, I'd like to turn it back to Susie for conclusion.
So we've kind of just walked you through our journey and how we've integrated it. As you can see, I think that our success has been is that we've been talking, but we've also been listening to all audiences. We went out and talked to the residents, whether it was in large groups, in small groups, or individually. We talked to our commissioners in large groups, informal groups, and individually. We talked to our staff. We took the time to really teach staff, what are AAAs, what does it mean, how do we integrate it? We taught and we talked to our planners, we talked to our engineers, we talked to our budget office, because they're going to be the next important step. So during this entire process, we have been talking and listening. I didn't put this in a bullet, but I have to say also that we branded this program early. And we knew that success of the AAAs was going to be if it kind of jumped right off of the vision process. So the slides that you've seen here today and the purple theme, if you will, that is straight from our vision process, and that is our coastal resiliency chapter, We Are Ready. So, being a AAA is tied to being ready, and being ready is in the vision plan, and the vision plan is what the neighbors asked for. So at the end of the day, it all goes back to listening to your residents and really working with them and having an engagement and making that integration. So I talked about how we integrated all these plans, and really the trick here, I think, for success for other cities is to leverage the different projects with common goals. Don't forget to do that. So don't work in isolation. It's easy to kind of let the engineers play by themselves and let the planners play by themselves. And I like to sort of force everybody into the room, and everybody's got to share their toys. And at the end of the day, you're going to leave happier, and you're going to leave much more productive and successful. So that's what we've done in the city. That's how we've taken this regional work and these regional concepts. That's how we have benefited from their very strong county bonds, and really made it happen here in the city. And I'm pretty excited about those next steps. I'm really excited about next year making those designations and really start talking about how to prioritize funding. So with that, I'll close, and I think close right on time for the question and answer portion of the show. So thank you again from the City of Fort Lauderdale.
This is Vivian again. I just wanted to thank all of our really outstanding speakers. I think one of the things that intrigued us the most was all the levels of planning going on in that part of the state. You have the regional planning, county level, MPO, and local government all working cooperatively together. So I think that's a real lesson on how to plan at all levels and make sure that what you're working on is cooperative. I want to do a little bit of housekeeping before we open it up for questions. We are a nonprofit. We hope you will consider making a donation so we can continue to offer these really low-cost programs. Again, a little bit of housekeeping. For those of you who arrived late, the PowerPoint is right here on our website, which is 1000friendsofflorida.org. If you click on this on the right-hand side, you can get the PowerPoint. We also have included links to a number of the planning studies and documents that were discussed. So if you want to find out more, we encourage you to click here and it'll have more. Again, as a reminder, we do have a survey out on what communities around Florida are doing to address climate change and sea level rise. We're doing this so that we can update our website to have more of a comprehensive catalog on what is being done for other communities that want to learn more about it. If you do want to make a donation, here's the button right here to do that. If you'd like to attend upcoming webinars, click on the outreach button and it'll drop down and there will be a button that says upcoming webinars. So we encourage you to attend future ones. And just again as a reminder, if you're particularly interested in sea level rise, we have one planned in January that's going to be talking about legal issues associated with sea level rise. To go over how to ask questions, we've had a number come in already, but if you would like to ask a question, you have a chat box on your control screen. If it doesn't look like this and it has a little plus sign, click on the plus and it'll maximize it. You can type your message here. You can either send it to the entire audience or you can click here and just send it to me and I will ask as many questions as possible as time permits. If it's directed at a particular person, indicate that and we'll be happy to do that as well. Again, as a reminder, I know a number of you are planners, attorneys, certified floodplain managers. We have applied for and received credits for that. This is the information on it. I believe if you don't get this information down quickly enough, if you go to our upcoming webinar page at the top, there's a link that'll show you credits for all of our past webinars going on. These are the ones that are coming up. Again, November 12th is our next one. The registration is now open for that, Planning for Complete Streets. I'll be posting any day now the link to register for Planning for Greenways. Then January, Planning for Sea Level Rise, Legal Issues Facing Florida. February, Victor Dover is going to be presenting on his new book, The Secret to Great Cities and Towns. And then in March, we start doing our Florida legislative updates. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. So what I'm going to do now is open it up to our panel for questions. I believe Charles had received a question in advance of the webinar, and he was going to start off with that, and then I will ask questions as they come in. Charles, are you ready?
Yeah, thanks, Vivian. Yeah, the question had to do with long-term beach and dune protection, shoreline resiliency, maybe strategies to reduce reliance on coastal armoring. And I think Jennifer mentioned something, from the Nature Conservancy, and I just wanted to see if we could get a link to that and possibly have the city or the county also comment on what they're doing with those beach and dune protection issues.
This is Jennifer. Shall I go ahead and respond?
That'd be fine, yes.
Yes. I'll be glad to send the link through. I believe that document was uploaded to the Nature Conservancy website that is supported by the here in South Florida. It may also be on our compact website, and it was just produced in hard copy this last week. So I just need to make sure that is indeed uploaded, but I'll send the link over to you, Vivian. And And with regards to the local projects, and I know Fort Lauderdale will be able to weigh in on this as well, but we have been undertaking an effort to try and involve more community in these types of initiatives so that there's a greater sense of an appreciation of the importance of these types of features as part of a shared resilience strategy. We've recently been partnering with the Youth Environmental Alliance that has been able to bring in corporate sponsors, municipal and county collaborative partners, and community youth groups to help support these installations. This year, Broward County formally budgeted, set aside funds just for dune initiatives, and many of our cities are independently supporting with themselves or also in collaboration with YEA, the Youth Environmental Alliance, similar projects. There are many more diverse efforts on a regional scale. I will admit that in Broward, our Living Shorelines efforts have been largely focused on that. It's the dune installation and rehabilitation. But the regional document includes much more. I'll also note that with respect to Port Everglades, we've done a lot of mangrove sorts of mitigation and restoration as well. We have a lot invested in the way of mitigation projects that's supporting some of those priorities. And maybe Fort Lauderdale would like to talk more about their local efforts.
Susie and Jim, you have yourselves muted on your end. If you could unmute yourself, thank you. Oops, you're muted again. If you could unmute yourself on your end if you want to respond to that question. Okay, while we wait for Susie and Jim to unmute themselves, and James Cromar is also muted. Susie and Jim, are you there?
I think we're here. Can you hear
Yes, you're here. Okay, great.
Okay. Sorry about that. I don't really think I can add much more to Jennifer's point.
Okay, great. Jennifer, we did have another question for you. How are the compact and other entities coordinating the compact's findings and modelings with the South Florida Water Management District's consumptive use permitting activities, especially for municipal water systems? That's a big question to address.
Right. Well, so both Miami-Dade County and Broward County are working with the USGS in the development of our models. And I believe it's the case for the for Miami-Dade, but it's certainly true of Broward, that the South Florida Water Management District has been a partner in all of our model development and well informed as to the work that we're doing. So they've helped to refine those processes and think about the calibrations, assumptions, and so forth. Now, how it's being taken into consumptive use permitting, well, what I would say there is that on a regional scale level, the South Florida Water Management District actually adopted a policy that restricts future withdrawals from the Biscayne aquifer as a whole. So the modeling isn't designed necessarily to justify large increases in consumptive use permits, but what it will do is demonstrate in areas where we can utilize alternative water supply offsets to largely as aquifer recharge to offset a withdrawal, to ensure that well field operations aren't likely to exacerbate any additional saltwater intrusion, and also utilizing the modeling to support where we might want to choose to relocate well fields or take additional advantage of well fields where we're having to abandon others. And I think that as this modeling work is refined, that's the type of application that we'll be working more closely with the district on. We're also working closely with the district on a regional scale on the mapping of the saltwater intrusion front. That's been a process that perhaps hasn't been very well coordinated historically, but we're trying to bring together all of the the data sets in order to be more refined in our monitoring of that trend. So I think that there's a great deal of collaboration. Clearly, we have the regional models. All of the water utilities have to undertake even more refined level modeling as part of their consumptive use permit applications. But it is, as I think we've tried to express, there's these alignment of efforts, and there's a common understanding of the tools that we have, the scales at which they can be used, and the opportunities for their application. So the collaboration has been a very positive one. I also want to share that the district very recently has just done a superior job in holding some regional conversations that have been focused on robust decision making and longer-term monitoring of saltwater trends within the environment, supporting a lot of the high tide evaluations and assessments of vulnerable infrastructure. So it's been a very satisfying relationship, particularly in the last year where we've seen such an organization of resources on their end.
Okay, thank you. We have another question for James Cromar. Is it possible or likely that your new adaptation policy approach would recommend that portions of the regional roadway network not be rebuilt in the event of an inundation event or other destructive event in a vulnerable area?
This is James here, and I got to make sure I phrase this correctly so that it's not taken out of context. But yes, that is a possibility that it may not make sense to rebuild a portion of the regional roadway network. And let's clarify that that's just a possibility. So, for example, I mentioned the A1A reconstruction in Fort Lauderdale when it got washed out 2 years ago. And there was some discussion from environmental interest seeing that this is a type of facility that will probably get washed out again, so do we necessarily need to rebuild it? That discussion had to be weighed in the context also of economic development for the city. A1A is an important connection for the tourists and people who are going to the beach, and an important part of the economy of the city of Fort Lauderdale and the entire region. So there are going to be trade-offs in those discussions of which facilities may or may not make sense to consider rebuilding. Another application of this may be as we look at impacts to the system, and let's say we have an extreme weather event that takes out a number of bridges. We will have to make then some strategic decisions about which of the facilities are more important to get back online quicker and which ones in a triage situation might have to wait a bit. An example that our consultant gave the other day was the bridge that connects to Key Biscayne, I think it's the Rickenbacker Causeway. If that were to go out, there's a significant impact to people who live there and the businesses and others, and that's the only connection that they might have. So that might have priority over another facility where there are some alternative ways to get around. So yeah, that's a serious approach of it may not make sense to rebuild some elements of the roadway network, but it has to be weighed in the context of a lot of other factors.
Okay, thank you, James. I just wanted to remind you that if you have questions, there is a chat box. You can maximize it by clicking here and type your question, and we'll answer them as time permits. I also forgot to mention you'll get an email about an hour after the webinar. It does have a survey in it from SurveyMonkey. We'd like your feedback on the webinar and what we can do to improve future events, so we encourage you to do that. We have a question for Susie Torrienti and Jimmy Katz. How are adaptation, I'm losing it, AAA developed programs and policies expected to affect city infrastructure policies, if at all, relating to rebuilding Barrier Island post-disaster reconstruction? I might have read that too quickly. You want me to repeat that again?
If you don't mind.
Okay. How are AAA developed programs and policies expected to affect city infrastructure policies, if at all, related to rebuilding Barrier Island post-disaster reconstruction? So I'm assuming that means things like, rebuilding roads on barrier islands after there's been some event.
Right. I'll take a stab at it, and Jimmy can probably jump in too. But remember the point of having AAAs is to designate an area that's susceptible to the effects of sea level rise, right? And it's for the purpose of prioritizing funding. So it's clearly an area that it needs to be resilient for any variety of reasons, whether it's for public health, safety, evacuations, and things of that nature. So if a section has been designated AAA and it has had the effects of a storm, and we have to invest, I just think it's logical and it would follow suit. As an example, 2 years ago when we had 4 blocks of A1A washed out, I think James had a picture of it. That's an area where we got together with our partners. It's a city. It's in the city, but it's a state road, and the beach is actually county maintained. And so we got together with those 3 partners and with the residents of the area, and we looked at the area and we said we have 2 choices. We can just rebuild it the way it is because we need a road there for evacuation purposes, and it's a main line, a thoroughfare. Or we can rebuild with resiliency in mind. And that's what we did. The design and the construction that's going on today in that road is it's a slightly elevated roadway. It has better drainage. It has a wider pedestrian path, like the residents asked for, and it has actually only 2 lanes and the turn lane. So that was redesigned with resiliency in mind. So if we were to go back and say that could have been a AAA and a good example of that. So I think that the designation of AAAs is just going to help us make informed decisions because we will have more information and better data to do that.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. This is especially for the Fort Lauderdale presenters. Did you experience any pushback from climate change skeptics or from property owners who fear the outcome and discussion may affect their property values?
Yeah, that was, sure, we had some that brought that up. And but like Susie mentioned, the AAA's adaptation action areas, we tried to formulate that as a positive. It's something for the prioritization of funding for resilient infrastructure and things like that. So I think when we, like we mentioned, we did a lot of communication very early and very often, even back to when this topic of sea level rise came up during our visioning process. So we were thinking of, many of the questions are, what are you going to do about it? And so AAAs are one of those things of what we're going to do about it.
Yeah, and I would add that I do remember going to the Planning and Zoning Board and having one member voting yes, but kind of squirming in his seat a little bit, only because it was so unknown. But again, he also kind of took a leap of faith with everyone else on that board and with us, because we're not talking about adaptation in the city of Fort Lauderdale or in the region here in South Florida. It's not about retreat. It's not about giving up. It's about really focusing our energy and focusing our dollars, and even small incremental improvements, like the tidal valves that we're already installing on the Los Olos Isles area. It's about $20,000 or so to install a tidal valve. And we've seen just today with the high tides how some of those valves and how the valves are working, some better than others, some have their issues with maintenance. But the majority of the streets, you could drive by, you can, leave your front door, you could go out and walk your dog, So we're making those incremental investments, and that is going to add up to resiliency. So we're trying to make sure that people aren't afraid of adaptation. It's our new normal here, and it's okay.
Okay. Thank you. We had another question. Do any of you know of any case studies about actual adaptation techniques that are being used in terms of urban design. So I guess they're talking about on-the-ground adaptation techniques, and I'm assuming that maybe some of the examples from the Netherlands might be the best of what you could talk about. Does anybody want to address that question?
This is Jennifer. I'm glad to maybe address it in part. So with respect to the Netherlands example, several of the design concepts that they have employed in their landscape, I think ultimately do have some potential utility here in Southeast Florida. And during the resilient redesign process, we actually benefited from extensive participation from Dutch colleagues, and some of the concepts that are brought forward, and I think that we can see their functionality here, would be the polder sort of example, and that's kind of isolating an area in which we're maybe unable to deal with or adequately address the water management and drainage needs of say a smaller geographic area with our regional system. So we may need to start isolating some areas in order to be able to install additional pumps, particularly in areas that are downstream of our existing salinity control structures, and maybe isolate those and manage water much more actively with smaller pump systems than we could provide with the existing gravity infrastructure. So I think that that's proven on a much larger scale in the Dutch environment and the Netherlands, but there's a functional application that we could see being worth exploring in our area. The concept of just distributed storage is one that's widely embraced. We can see in our landscape that where we don't have surface water lakes for providing storage, the water is just stagnant on our surface, on roads, sidewalks, swales, up to doorsteps of homes, across entire streets. We're going to need to find ways, either through existing open space or subsequent land acquisition, in order to set aside land for the purpose of water storage. And that's a very kind of basic sort of design strategy. Some that are not architectural in nature but are certainly design considerations are the active integration of pumps where we've had gravity systems employed previously. I see one of the chat messages is, do we have an example? The city of Hallandale Beach has installed pumps on gravity wells that are no longer functioning with through the principle of gravity. So that's a transition towards an adaptation strategy. And again, it's much more active management of water, and I think that those are the types of things that we're going to see. Suppression of water, like with the one-way valves that Susie's described, which many of our communities are employing, and the pump system operations like Miami Beaches, I think maybe turning on some of their pumps for the first time today. But and elevating of roadways, installation of drainage, physical drainage infrastructure where we've maybe relied upon swales previously, and because of the rise in groundwater elevations and the impacting of swales and the extent of development, that might not be sufficient any longer. So more culverts and, again, construction of lakes or other areas of storage where we can actively move and push water. Those are some of the things that I think are really going to be most evident initially.
Thank you. Does anybody else know of any actual case studies that are out there that could be referred to? Okay, we have another question, and this might relate to the Nature Conservancy study. I don't know if they get to this level of detail, but the person is talking about how leaving seaweed on shore can allow nature to build up our dunes for us. Is anything like that being addressed using natural systems to rebuild dunes? Does the Nature Conservancy study cover that at all?
I don't remember that the Nature Conservancy study addresses that, and I'm sure it's, there's certainly utility in thinking about that approach. I'll admit that in the Broward environment, most of our beaches are cleaned daily.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Viv, this is James, if I could throw in a thought too, because the question earlier about urban design, I was thinking of a report I heard from Nature Conservancy up in New York State. And I think it's more interesting in terms of not just the design, but also the opportunity for collaboration. That the Nature Conservancy was pushing for fish migration corridors in their waterways, who were having limited success in the culverts adequately providing those connections. And then with the effects of Superstorm Sandy, the Nature Conservancy was able to join their forces with the groups that were going to respond to the effects of the storm. And as the roadways and culverts and other things were going through the rebuilding process, the Nature Conservancy was able to find a way to incorporate their goals of improving these migratory channels for the fish. And that has numerous impacts, not only in terms of the environment, but also in terms of the local tourism industry, of people who come to enjoy the nature in that area. So I think, the mention of Nature Conservancy made me think of that there may be a lot of other opportunities where certain groups might have some goals that aren't gaining traction, but there's a chance to combine with some of the other efforts that others are doing and advance those goals in different ways.
Okay, thank you. We have one last question. If anybody else out there has questions, please start sending them in. But the last question is, have any other areas in the state tried to obtain assistance from the South Florida Regional Climate Change Compact or its partners to initiate similar efforts in their area? And I think this is talking about Florida in particular. Have you all been approached from other regions of Florida to share what you've learned and what you're doing?
This is Susie. I can probably start, and Jennifer can add. And just last month, staff went up to Satellite Beach, and we were sharing our adaptation action area process and what we've done, and that because they're starting their own, so they wanted their residents and their community to kind of hear our story as well. We're often asked, and the compact is often called upon from other parts of the country, actually, and actually parts of around the world, through several of our professional associations. The work of the compact and generally has been looked at as a leader. The final thing I'll add is that as part of this pilot grant that we're in, the South Florida Regional Planning Council is writing a guidebook for Florida municipalities. So much of what you heard today and the options for AAAs, that will be all produced in a guidebook, which should be done rather soon, I think. Perhaps by the end of the year, that guidebook will be out there for other cities.
Okay. Does it? Go ahead.
I would add to that one of the things we didn't highlight in the presentations today is that we have continued to hold our annual climate summits. And just last week, we celebrated the 6th annual Southeast Florida Regional Climate Summit with nearly 600 in attendance. And those attendees are not just from the 4-county area, but are from throughout the state and beyond our state. And a number of the individuals who attended that I was familiar with were on the west coast of Florida, and they had reached out several months back with a strong interest in trying to replicate something of the compact in that area. And that's just one conversation. We've also been contacted by other regional planning councils who have been interested in hearing more about the process, and it sounds like there's maybe 3 or so different groups right now that are, maybe have some traction for organizing on a regional scale within our state. So I think that we frequently, many of us, field those types of inquiries, and that there has been a demonstrated interest in trying to think about how the compact model could be employed in other parts of our state.
Okay, thank you. We have had 2 more questions come in, so we will ask those 2 and then wrap it up at 2. Is there any value in opening up blueways that naturally exist or via man-made canals that have been clogged? This would be to allow water to move through and also provide secondary recreational economic activities. So opening up blueways.
Yeah. so I think it's you know, there are nearly, just the Broward example, there are nearly 24 different drainage and water control districts in our region, and those systems are highly, highly managed. We have tried in the past, some of our drainage districts, to create additional hydraulic connectivity within the systems, and unfortunately, we have also experienced very difficult challenges in maintaining drainage and flood control as we've reduced some of the control structures. And so, you know, I think that there probably is potential, but we need to explore how we can do that while maintaining salinity barriers and maintaining the active management that's needed in order to manage, you know, because there's these discrete basins and they all have different elevations and so forth. So I'm just saying it's a complex system. There's probably potential, but there's a lot that has to be considered in that process. It's probably one worth continuing to explore as part of modeling and planning efforts.
Okay, and the final question, does designation as an adaptation action area affect property insurance rates?
It's Susie from Fort Lauderdale. And I'll definitely want Jimmy and Jennifer to help me with this. But again, the purpose of adaptation action areas is to designate these areas that are vulnerable for the purpose of public infrastructure investment. So, you know, we're looking at areas within the public realm that we feel need and deserve that type of infrastructure investment. So that conversation with private property doesn't really fall into place. What we've talked about here is that we've gone through the 3 years of creating AAAs, and now we're going to designate. We're thinking ahead, and our thought process is what happens after designation and the infrastructure has been put in place, and now the area is in fact resilient. That might be an area where property values are actually up, and that's really more of an economic driver, if you will. So again, because we're looking at this in a very positive manner, we're looking at this at how it could benefit the city and at the end have that positive economic impact. But we're speculating a little bit because we're not there yet, but with our success thus far, I can see us maybe in another 3 to 4 years having that conversation. Right, Jimmy?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. We're addressing this in a very positive light.
Did anyone else have anything to add on this?
I think that the response is exactly on point. It's not a negative assignment of risk. It's one of recognizing the ability to mitigate through very strategic investments. And ultimately, I think that there's a benefit to being able to demonstrate proactive response on the part of community rather than one of, you know, like casual observation. The other thing that we haven't shared is that, and I think that Susie was alluding to it, it may be that communities might choose to employ AAA for a temporary basis, similar to how we have a community redevelopment districts. And it may be for the purpose of organizing those resources, and afterwards it may be that the designation is rescinded and then you move into another area requiring strategic investment. So I think that they should be recognized as bringing resources to communities and lowering risk rather than making assignments of risk.
Does anybody else have anything to add on that point? I just wanted to add that I was at the climate change summit in Miami Beach that they were talking about last week. It was really outstanding and very eye-opening about all the really innovative planning that's taking place in South Florida to address these issues. And one of the interesting presenters was from Swiss Re, which is a reinsurance company. And they were saying that they are already doing studies about how resilient communities are, and that those that are more resilient are likely to benefit down the road from better rates. So it would seem to me that the AAA would tie right into that of a community being proactive in terms of addressing resilience rather than it being viewed negatively as, you know, a negative thing. On that note, I wanted again to thank all of the really outstanding speakers we've had today. Again, the PowerPoint is posted on our website along with links to a number of the documents that we have that have been discussed today. Thank you all for participating. We encourage you to come to our next webinar in November, which is on complete streets. And with that, we will shut down and end up for the day. Thank you very much, everybody. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Everything go okay?